I've studied Western esoteric traditions for years. The Kybalion is the book most readers encounter first when they enter this world. It's short, it's memorable. Its 7 Hermetic principles have shaped how millions of people understand Western esotericism. And it's the most misread text in modern occultism. Not because it's a bad book, because it's presented as something it isn't. Ancient wisdom passed down through the ages from the mystery schools of Egypt and Greece. It isn't. It was written in 1908 by an American self-help writer under a pseudonym. Understanding what the Kybalion actually is opens the door to the tradition it doesn't quite belong to. Let me show you. The Kybalion was published in Chicago in 1908 by a company called the Yogi Publication Society. The author is listed as the 3 initiates, no names attached. Almost every scholar of American occult history now agrees on who actually wrote it: William Walker Atkinson. Atkinson was a prolific writer of the New Thought movement, the late 19th and early 20th century American spiritual philosophy that emphasized mental power, positive thinking, and the mind's ability to shape reality. Under multiple pseudonyms, Yogi Ramacharaka, Theron Q. Dumont, Magus Incognitus, he wrote hundreds of books, marketed through the Yogi Publication Society, which he ran. The Kybalion presents itself as an ancient Hermetic teaching preserved through initiate lineages back to Egypt and Greece. What it actually is: Atkinson's synthesis of real Hermetic concepts with New Thought philosophy, structured into 7 memorable principles. That structure is what made it a lasting book. But the presentation as ancient is what made it misread. The first time I read the Kybalion, I was in my early 20s, just starting to study Western esotericism seriously. Someone handed it to me and said, "Start here, everything comes from this." I read it in a weekend. I remembered the 7 principles for years: mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender, clean structure, easy to hold in mind. Then I started reading the actual classical Hermetic texts, the Corpus Hermeticum in translation, the Emerald Tablet, Ficino's 15th century Latin, Bruno's Cosmology. And I noticed something. The Kybalion's principles don't map cleanly onto what's in the classical Hermetic corpus. Some ideas, correspondence, the mind nature of reality, are there. Others, polarity, rhythm, gender as universal principles, aren't classically Hermetic. They come from a 19th century synthesis of ideas that Atkinson wove together and gave a Hermetic name. Which means the Kybalion isn't wrong exactly, but it isn't what it claims to be either. Understanding this shifted how I read every esoteric book afterward. Not, is this ancient? But what tradition did this actually come from, and what does it point toward? So, what is the real Hermetic tradition? A body of texts written in Greek in Alexandria between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era. The core is called the Corpus Hermeticum, 18 tractates presenting the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary Egyptian-Greek sage figure who blended the Egyptian Thoth with the Greek Hermes into one initiatory teacher. The most famous tractate is the Poimandres, an initiatory dialogue where Poimandres, the divine mind, reveals the origins of the cosmos, the descent of the soul into matter, and the path of return to the divine. Then there's the Emerald Tablet, the Tabula Smaragdina, a short Latin text of about a dozen sentences attributed to Hermes. It contains the famous phrase, "as above, so below." This is what the Kybalion's principle of correspondence draws from directly. There's also the Asclepius, a longer Latin dialogue on divine cosmology and the human condition. These are the classical Hermetic texts, written in Alexandria, circulated through late antiquity, lost to the Latin West through the Middle Ages, and then rediscovered by Cosimo de' Medici, who commissioned Marsilio Ficino to translate them into Latin in 1471. That single translation changed Western thought. Hermeticism became foundational for Renaissance philosophy, for alchemy, for astrology, for ceremonial magic, for Christian Kabbalah, for Rosicrucianism, and eventually for the symbolic vocabulary of Freemasonry. That's the classical Hermetic tradition. 20 centuries old, documented, studyable, real. Now let's look at the Kybalion's 7 principles honestly, against the classical corpus. 2 of the 7 have clear classical Hermetic roots. Correspondence, as above, so below, comes directly from the Emerald Tablet, fully classical. Mentalism, the universe as mental, the all is mind, draws from the Poimandres, where the divine mind is the source of the cosmos. Real Hermetic, though the Kybalion strips it out of its initiatory context. 3 of the 7 are 19th century syntheses presented as ancient. Polarity, everything is dual, everything has poles. This is American New Thought, influenced by 19th century philosophical dualism, not classical Hermeticism. Rhythm, everything flows out and in, same origin, not classically Hermetic. Gender, everything has masculine and feminine principles, draws on 19th century occult synthesis of Kabbalistic and alchemical polarity concepts, but presents them as ancient universal wisdom, which they weren't. 2 of the 7 are general philosophical concepts. Vibration exists in the classical tradition as celestial harmony, but as a universal principle stated this way, it's more 19th century occult synthesis than classical Hermetic. Cause and effect is a general philosophical principle present across most traditions, Aristotle, the Stoics, the Buddhist Dharma, not specifically Hermetic. So, 2 clearly Hermetic, 3 New Thought synthesis, 2 general. That's the honest count. Now the honest part. I've spent years with the classical Hermetic corpus and its Renaissance interpreters. Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Bruno, Robert Flood. These are the writers I return to when I want to think seriously about Western esotericism. They aren't easier than the Kybalion, they're harder. They ask you to sit with the text and think slowly. But they carry the actual tradition, not a 1908 summary of it. If you're serious about the study, my suggestion, read the Corpus Hermeticum in the Salomon translation. Read the Emerald Tablet in Newton's translation and see what Newton the physicist actually thought about it. Read Ficino's introduction to his 1471 translation of the Corpus. The moment classical Hermeticism entered the Renaissance. The Kybalion gave a lot of us the vocabulary. These texts give the tradition. So here's how to read the Kybalion honestly, not as ancient wisdom, not as fake wisdom either, as a well-structured 1908 synthesis written by a talented American author under a pseudonym, blending real Hermetic concepts with New Thought philosophy. As a gateway, it works. Millions of people came to Western esotericism through it. Its 7 principles are memorable. Its structure invites contemplation. But as a first and last book, it stops you at the door. The tradition it points toward is deeper, richer, and more difficult. It rewards years of reading. It rewards learning enough Latin or Greek to check translations. It rewards sitting with a text long enough for it to change how you see. Read the Kybalion as gateway, then walk through the door. One more thing before I go. Next Thursday we look at the 12 sentences at the core of classical Western esotericism, the Emerald Tablet. The text, Newton translated by candlelight. The text Ficino called the Summary of Divine Wisdom. It's the source of as above, so below, and every Hermetic system built after it inherited it. Next Thursday, what the Emerald Tablet actually says and what its 12 sentences mean. Subscribe if this is the kind of work you want more of. This is the Hidden Thread.